You're funding Adam's company again? My voice cracked as I stared across the dining table at my father. Dad, his last 2 ventures burned through tens of thousands of your money. I'm pitching you an actual plan, something viable, and you won't even consider it? My father, Omar Hassan, didn't even blink. He folded his napkin neatly, leaning back in his chair as if I hadn't just poured weeks of effort into the proposal sitting in front of him. Layla, I admire your enthusiasm, but business is a man's responsibility. Adam needs this to establish himself. You have a stable job. You should focus on that. The words stung more than I wanted to admit. My brother Adam was staring at his phone, barely paying attention. He didn't even move at my father's dismissive tone. Why would he? He'd heard it before, always directed at me. My name is Layla Hassan, and I'm 30 years old. For as long as I can remember, I've wanted to start my own business. I've always been the ambitious one, the planner, the one who researched ideas late into the night and woke up with new ones buzzing in my head. It wasn't just a dream, it was my calling. Growing up, I'd watched my father build his own business from scratch, a logistics company that became the backbone of our family's stability. I admired his work ethic and his tenacity, but most of all, I admired the way he made something out of nothing. I wanted to follow in his footsteps, but it was clear early on that he didn't see me as a successor. For him, Adam was the heir apparent. Despite my older brother's lack of drive, my father saw him as the natural choice. Adam had tried and failed at several ventures by now, an e-commerce site, a failed app, and a short-lived marketing agency. Each time my father had written the checks and made excuses for his failures. Adam just needs to find his footing, he'd say. It's all part of the process. But when it came to me, there were no excuses, no second chances. My entrepreneurial aspirations were brushed aside as impractical or unimportant. You're better off staying in your job, he'd tell me. It's secure, and you're good at it. He wasn't wrong. I was good at my job. I'd worked my way up to a mid-level role in finance, managing complex budgets and analyzing market trends. But it wasn't enough. I wanted something of my own, something I could build and nurture. And now, staring at my father's calm, unyielding face, I realized he'd never see that in me. Dad, this is a mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You're giving Adam another shot at something he's not ready for. Meanwhile, I've spent months developing this plan. It's low risk and scalable. You could have returns within the first year. My father shook his head. Layla, it's not about risk. It's about opportunity. Adam needs this. And I don't? I snapped, the frustration boiling over. Why does he deserve a chance, but I don't? Is it because I'm not good enough or because I'm not... Enough, my father interrupted, his tone sharp. This discussion is over. I stood there for a moment, my chest tight and my hands trembling. Then I pushed back my chair and left the table without another word. That night, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the proposal I'd spent weeks perfecting. It wasn't just a plan, it was a piece of me. I'd envisioned a boutique consultancy that offered financial planning and strategy for small businesses, combining my passion for numbers with my desire to help others succeed. I'd identified a niche market, created detailed projections, and even mapped out a marketing strategy. And my father had dismissed it without a second glance. I wanted to cry, but instead I opened my laptop. If my father wouldn't back me, I'd figure out another way. I didn't have his resources, but I had my skills, my determination, and my savings. It wasn't much, barely enough to cover the basics, but it was a start. I wasn't going to let his doubts stop me. The next morning, I called Yasmin, my best friend and the only person who'd supported my entrepreneurial dreams from the beginning. I'm going to do it, I told her, my voice shaky but resolute. I'm starting the business. Yes, she exclaimed, her enthusiasm like a balm for my battered confidence. I'm so proud of you, Layla. You're going to crush this. I don't know about crushing it, I said with a weak laugh. But I'm going to try. I can't let him win. I can't let him be right about me. He's not right about you, Yasmin said firmly. He's stuck in the past. This isn't about proving him wrong. It's about proving yourself right. Her words stayed with me all day. I didn't need my father's approval to succeed. I just needed to believe in myself. Starting the business was harder than I expected, and I already knew it wouldn't be easy. I drained most of my savings on registration fees, a basic website, and the cheapest laptop that could run the accounting software I needed. My dining table became my office, and every spare minute outside my day job went into building the foundation of my company. My first hurdle was finding clients. I scoured online forums, cold emailed small businesses, and even went door to door in local shopping districts, handing out flyers I'd designed myself. Most of the time, people were polite but non-committal. "We'll think about it," they'd say, or "maybe next quarter." I tried not to let the rejections get to me, but it was hard not to feel like I was in over my head. At night, I'd lie in bed replaying my father's words. Focus on your stable job. Some nights, I almost believed he was right. "Layla, you need to stop beating yourself up," Yasmin said one evening as we sat in my apartment, brainstorming ways to get my name out there. "This is how it goes at the start. You're planting seeds. They'll grow. You just need to give it time." Yasmin had become my biggest cheerleader and unofficial business partner. She worked as a graphic designer, and when I told her about my idea, she immediately offered to help with branding. She designed a logo, spruced up my website, and created sleek, professional-looking brochures that made my little operation feel more legitimate. "I don't know what I'd do without you," I said, watching her tweak a design on her tablet. "You'd figure it out," she replied with a smile. "But lucky for you, you don't have to." With her help, I revamped my marketing approach. Instead of casting a wide net, I focused on businesses in my community, boutiques, cafes, and other small operations that were struggling to stay afloat. I offered free consultations to get my foot in the door, and though it meant more work with no immediate payoff, it started to pay dividends. One client led to another, and soon I had a small but steady stream of business. Meanwhile, my family's skepticism hung over me like a dark cloud. My father hadn't said much since I'd walked out of that dinner, but his silence was its own kind of judgment. My mother called occasionally to check in, though it was clear she was fishing for updates. "How's your little project going?" she'd ask, her tone kind but patronizing. "It's not a project, Mama," I'd say, forcing a smile. "It's a business. And it's going well." "Good, good," she'd reply quickly, as if eager to move on. "You know, your father is very busy with Adam's company right now. Maybe you should ask Adam for advice." The mention of Adam made my stomach turn. His startup, buoyed by my father's funding, was floundering. I knew because I still had connections in the industry, and word had gotten around that Adam was struggling to keep his investors happy. Yet my father continued to throw money at him, insisting he just needed more time. One afternoon, I ran into Adam at a coffee shop near my apartment. He was sitting at a table, typing furiously on his laptop, his face a mask of frustration. "Hey," I said, approaching cautiously. "How's it going?" He looked up, startled. "Layla, what are you doing here?" "I live around the corner," I said, gesturing toward the window. "How's the company?" He hesitated, his eyes darting back to his screen. "It's fine. Just a lot of moving parts, you know?" "Right," I said, not pressing further. But as I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that Adam was in way over his head. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Back at home, I threw myself into refining my strategy. I started tracking every detail of my business, analyzing what worked and what didn't. I tightened my budget, streamlined my processes, and set ambitious but achievable goals. Every small victory felt monumental. The first client to recommend me to someone else. The first month I made enough profit to cover my rent. Each step forward proved to me that I was capable, even if my father couldn't see it. One evening, Yasmin and I celebrated my first big milestone, landing a contract with a local chain of bakeries to manage their finances and payroll. "This is it, Layla," she said. clinking her soda can against mine. "This is your breakthrough." "It's a start," I said with a smile, though my heart swelled with pride. For the first time, I felt like I was gaining real momentum. Despite the progress, setbacks still came. A potential client ghosted me after weeks of negotiations. Another dropped my services after deciding to hire an in-house team. Each time, I felt the sting of rejection, but I refused to let it derail me. Instead, I leaned on Yasmin and reminded myself why I'd started this journey in the first place. "I'm not doing this to prove my father wrong," I said during one of our late-night planning sessions. "At least, not entirely. I'm doing this because I believe in it. I believe in me. And that," Yasmin said, pointing at me with her pen, "is why you're going to make it." The turning point came 6 months after I launched my business. The bakery chain I'd landed as a client started recommending me to their suppliers, and suddenly, my inbox was flooded with inquiries. Within weeks, I was managing financial planning and payroll for 5 small businesses, and I'd hired Yasmin part-time to help with branding and communications. The growth was exhilarating. For the first time, I could afford to move my office from my dining table to a co-working space downtown. It wasn't fancy, but it felt like a milestone, a tangible sign of how far I'd come. Every time I walked into that space, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and buzz of creativity, I felt proud. I built this, I'd remind myself. I made this happen. Meanwhile, the cracks in Adam's startup were becoming impossible to ignore. Rumors swirled about missed deadlines, unhappy investors, and internal chaos. My mother's calls became more frequent, her concern for Adam seeping into every conversation. "He's under so much pressure," she'd say, her voice heavy with worry. "Your father's doing everything he can to help him, but I don't know if it'll be enough." The collapse came fast. One morning, while I was meeting with a new client, my phone buzzed with a series of messages from a friend in the industry. "Have you heard? Adam's company is shutting down. Investors pulled out. Total mess. Your dad must be furious." By the time I got home that evening, the news had reached my parents. My mother called me, her voice a mixture of panic and resignation. "Layla, can you come over for dinner tonight? Your father wants to talk to you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to decline, to avoid the inevitable drama, but a bigger part of me wanted to face them, to show my father that while Adam's venture had failed, I was thriving. When I arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. My father sat at the head of the table, his face lined with stress. My mother hovered nearby, setting plates on the table even though no one looked interested in eating. Adam was slouched in a chair, staring at his phone. "Layla," my father said as I took my seat, "we need to talk." I braced myself, expecting a lecture about family loyalty or an appeal to help Adam pick up the pieces. Instead, he surprised me. "I've been hearing about your business," he said, his tone measured. "You've built something impressive." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I'd waited so long to hear those words from him that I didn't know how to respond. "Thank you," I said finally, keeping my voice steady. "It hasn't been easy, but it's worth it." He nodded, his eyes flicking to Adam, who was still scrolling through his phone. Adam's company didn't work out. I thought I was helping him by giving him what he needed, but I see now that I wasn't helping either of you. I stared at him, hardly believing what I was hearing. "What do you mean?" "I underestimated you," he admitted, his gaze meeting mine. "I thought Adam needed my support more than you did. I was wrong. You've proven that." Adam finally looked up, his face a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. "Dad, this isn't about her," he said, his voice defensive. "My company didn't fail because of me. The investors—" "Enough, Adam," my father said sharply. "You're not a failure, but you weren't ready. Layla was." The room fell silent. I could see the weight of my father's words settling on Adam, and though part of me wanted to feel vindicated, I also felt a pang of empathy. I knew what it was like to feel dismissed, to struggle to prove yourself. The difference was I'd turned that struggle into fuel. "Layla," my father continued, his voice softer now, "I'm proud of you. I should have told you that sooner. You've shown me what it means to fight for something you believe in. I see that now." For years, I'd imagined this moment, my father finally acknowledging my worth, apologizing for overlooking me. I thought it would feel triumphant, like winning a long and brutal battle. But in that moment, I didn't feel like I'd won anything. I felt something deeper. Peace. "Thank you, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't do this to prove you wrong. I did it because I knew I could. And I hope now you can see that too." He nodded, his expression heavy with a mix of regret and pride. "I do," he said simply. That evening, as I left my parents' house, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. My father's words couldn't undo the years of doubt, but they were a start. More importantly, they weren't the validation I needed anymore. I'd found that on my own. The weeks following that dinner were quieter than I expected. My father didn't bring up Adam's failed startup again, but the tension between them seemed to ease. Adam still carried the weight of disappointment, but he began asking me questions about my business, questions I never imagined he'd ask. One evening, he called me out of the blue. "Layla," he started, sounding hesitant, "how do you manage your client relationships? Like, what keeps them coming back?" I almost dropped my phone. "Are you asking for advice?" "Yeah," he admitted. "I mean, clearly you're doing something right. I don't want to make the same mistakes again." For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. Part of me wanted to bask in the irony, my brother, the golden child, asking me for guidance. But I could hear the sincerity in his voice, and it reminded me of how much I'd wanted that same validation not long ago. "It's about trust," I said finally. "You can have the best product or service in the world, but if your clients don't trust you to deliver, none of it matters. You have to show them you're invested in their success." "Huh," Adam said thoughtfully. "That makes sense. Thanks, Layla." The call ended, but it stayed with me. Adam's humility, though tentative, was a sign of growth I hadn't expected. My father, too, began to change. He stopped referring to my business as a project and started asking real questions about my clients, my strategies, and my long-term goals. He even offered to connect me with a few of his old contacts, though I politely declined. I wasn't ready to mix family and business again, not yet. Still, his support meant something. One afternoon, he visited my office for the first time. It was a modest co-working space, nothing like the sprawling headquarters he used to run, but he seemed genuinely impressed. "You've built something remarkable here," he said, looking around. "I'm proud of you, Layla." I smiled, the words warming a part of me I hadn't realized was still tender. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot." But the biggest change was within me. For years, I'd tied my worth to my father's approval, waiting for him to see me as capable. Now, I realized I didn't need his validation, or anyone else's. My confidence came from knowing what I'd accomplished, from the risks I'd taken and the lessons I'd learned along the way. Running a business wasn't just about profit margins or client retention. It was about resilience, creativity, and believing in yourself even when no one else does. And I'd proven to myself that I could do it. One evening, as I sat in my office wrapping up for the day, I looked out at the city lights and thought about how far I'd come. My family dynamics were shifting, slowly but surely. My father and brother were learning to see me not as the underestimated daughter or sibling, but as someone who could stand on her own. And more importantly, I was learning to see myself that way too. The journey wasn't over. I still had goals to achieve, clients to win, and challenges to overcome. But for the first time, I felt truly independent, truly capable. This was my life, and I was living it on my own terms. 6 months later, my business had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. What started as a one-woman operation at my dining table had become a small but thriving consultancy. I'd hired 2 part-time employees to help manage the workload, and Yasmin had officially joined as my creative director. Together, we were helping small businesses turn their finances around, one spreadsheet and strategy at a time. One of my proudest moments came when a regional business magazine featured me in an article about emerging entrepreneurs. They called my company a shining example of grassroots success, and when the article was published, I sent a copy to my parents. My mother called immediately, her voice brimming with pride. "Layla, this is incredible. Your father's already framed it for his office." The thought of my father proudly displaying an article about my business was almost surreal. For years, I'd wanted nothing more than for him to see me this way, as someone capable and deserving of his respect. And now I'd earned that respect not because he handed it to me, but because I proved it to myself. At family dinners, things felt different. My father asked thoughtful questions about my work, genuinely interested in my answers. Adam, too, seemed to have turned a corner. He'd started working for a marketing firm, finally finding his footing in a structured environment where his creativity could shine. There was no longer an air of competition between us, only mutual respect. "Layla," Adam said one evening as we cleared the table, "you're doing something amazing. I'm proud of you." "Thanks, Adam," I replied, the sincerity of his words settling warmly in my chest. "That means a lot." He grinned. "But don't think I won't steal some of your ideas for my next project." "Only if you pay me consulting fees," I shot back, laughing. The biggest change, though, was within me. Running my business had taught me more than just the mechanics of entrepreneurship. It had shown me the power of perseverance and self-belief. I no longer doubted my place at the table or felt the need to justify my ambitions. I was living proof that success wasn't about who got the first chance. It was about who made the most of it. One afternoon, I stood in my office looking out at the bustling street below. My father's voice echoed in my mind, not the dismissive tone from that dinner months ago, but the proud words he'd spoken more recently. "You've built something remarkable." For so long I'd waited for his approval, but now I realized it wasn't what defined me. I defined me. As I locked up the office and headed home, I felt a deep sense of peace. My business was thriving, my family relationships were healing, and I was finally living a life that felt authentically mine. The road hadn't been easy, but every struggle had shaped me into the leader I was becoming. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the start of something even bigger. My future was in my hands, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me.